She just said ladies on Sunset.
Okay, it's 5 o'clock on a Monday, May 1st, the day you're supposed to bring flowers to your next-door neighbor.
Yes.
So we're going to call our Land Use and, Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting to order. And tonight, we have Lydia and Hong at off-site. I don't see Lydia there, but I hear you're there, Lydia, so let me know. And we'll get started.
I'm here.
Okay. So we're going to call the meeting to order, and now the first thing we will have is item number 2 is public comment. This is for anybody to come forward and spend 3 minutes up at the podium and comment on anything that we have on our agenda. So do we have any public comment?
We have one that was turned in here, and then we had a couple that were turned in online. This one's for Ian Morrison.
Okay. Mr. Morrison? Yeah, everybody looked at the ones that came in line. I think we've all had a chance to read them.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Welcome again.
Thank you, council members. For the record, Ian Morrison. I'm a land use attorney with McCullough Hill, 701 Fifth Avenue, Suite 6600, Seattle, Washington. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on both the school and the park impact fees. Well, want to appreciate the evolution of the school impact fees. That's from the comments that we had last month to today. I think it's moving in the right direction to provide predictability for the development community. We especially appreciate bringing those fees down predictably in the city center to 0. I am here tonight. You'll hear some other comments from other developers. I'm here on behalf of Mill Creek Residential, which is looking at a project of about 400 units on 320th, just outside on the east of I-5. What the city has been doing with your housing action plan, with the work that you've been doing on the school impact fees, is absolutely, I can say from Mill Creek's perspective, the right type of direction to encourage housing in the city of Federal Way. And so I would offer just 2, and there's a letter that we submitted on behalf of Mill Creek, 2 friendly amendments to the current package that you have with the school impact fees and the park impact fees. Number 1, we like the direction of the 0 impact fees and the predictability for a short-term duration. And that is right now in the city center frame and core and the BC zoning. This site on 320th is just outside the BC zoning on the east of I-5. And so we would encourage that same concept of the predictability and what we are calling an on-ramp, meaning that for all zones in the city of Federal Way, that they are at 0 impact fees for a short period of time. And the reason I'm calling this as an on-ramp is we offered in this, say, the first 1,000 units that come into the city are at 0. Which then provides that predictability for the development community. And it also creates an alignment of interest in our mind with the city, which is it's a race to get in to be able to have that predictability of those first 1,000 units. And so if you get in there and you're vested to that 0 impact fees outside the city center core, frame, and BC zone, you're at 0. If you are the 1,001st unit, then you are paying those fees. And so it gives sort of a predictable on-ramp so that people can underwrite to those fees. And I think that's a school impact fee concept that we think is the right direction. We would also offer, a little bit of feedback, I would say, on the park impact fee. It's a little bit of a surprise, that you're with the housing action plan reducing fees, and then from the development community imposing new fees on the park impact fee. So should the council, in its legislative discretion, want to adopt a park impact fee, we would encourage that same on-ramp concept for all zones, since the current draft as we read it does not have an exemption for city center. So that if you are going to choose to adopt park impact fees, provide that same on-ramp at 1,000 units, or I saw a letter from NAIOP, the Commercial Real Estate Development Association, using 2,000 units. Provide some sort of concept so that there's an alignment of, yes, eventually there will be these impact fees, but for the first units in the door, creating new multifamily housing in the city of Federal Way, they are at the predictable 0 rates. So we would just encourage you to consider that concept, appreciate all the work that staff has done in working with this draft, the comments from the council, and just encourage further dialogue to provide predictability. Thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have M. Banks online, and you want to? Oh, for public comment?
I believe so. They have their hand raised.
Okay. Am I? You there?
It's a busy line.
It's a busy line.
I thought they were cutting out the,
Am I here?
cutting out the
Can you
Are
hear
you-
me?
humanities.
Yes,
Oh, good. Okay.
You're up.
Am I clear? All right. Well, thank you all very, very much. Sorry for the, any technical difficulties that might be happening. I hope it's not too much, but, Chair Dovey, council members, Sefa Dawson, Trans, city staff, thank you very much for the opportunity to present public comment here tonight. The Master Builders Association of King and Snohomish Counties takes pride in, our building communities. We've got over 2,600 members of professional home builders, and architects, remodelers, all sorts of other associate members in the community. And we're committed to ensuring that all people can attain housing and have a safe and good place to call home. We have concerns and plaudits surrounding two of tonight's agenda items, the same ones that Ian at McCullough Hill mentioned, the agenda item E and F, the school impact fees and the park impact fees. We acknowledge impact fees in general tend to reduce investor value and are a big contributor to, housing projects not penciling and new housing not being constructed in a city. However, we do actually applaud the city's adoption of Heartland's recommendations when it comes to the predictability of school impact fees. Federal Way's seen a real roller coaster over the past couple of years when it comes to school impact fees, and we like the 5% cap that y'all are proposing. However, we do want to ask and just kind of make a request when this, the school in the future, 10, 20 years down the road comes and they say, hey, we need a 5% increase, that there's some sort of double check and safety coming from the city to make sure that they're just not, pushing that all the way to the max. When it comes to park impact fees, MBAX generally does argue against the implementation of new fees, especially if school impact fees are going to be increased simultaneously. However, we are aware that the city is planning to reduce open space requirements for park to propose kind of a trade-off with park impact fee implementation. We would ask that y'all delay bringing this to council until that park impact fee conversation has gone through planning commission on May 3rd, and is, kind of moving up at the same time, maybe do that in tandem or afterwards. It's, you know how difficult it can be sometimes when the government says that they're going to do something right after the implementation of one thing, and then it ends up not happening. So we'd ask that you delay that park impact fee until after the open space requirement proposal has passed. And then additionally, we'd ask that there's a study on that impact fee implementation, ensuring that the park impact fee paid is less than the cost of the lost density and fee in lieu. And we can provide a member steel development down, can help you all out with that. And I'm out of time, so thank you.
thank you very much. Is there any other public comment? Anybody like to come forward, or, yes, sir? Please come to the podium, state your name, where you're from, and then fill out a pink sheet afterwards so we have the record.
Yeah, sorry about that. I thought I had done that online, but I'll get a pink sheet filled up.
Yeah, online they come to us, we read them, but yeah, you're up. You
No
got
problem.
Go.
I'm David Avenel with Intracorp Real Estate. I just wanted to get my comments on record tonight. I had submitted a letter and wanted to, read its content for you
Yep,
guys.
saw your letter, so please go right ahead.
As you know, Intracorp Real Estate is currently pursuing development of 133 market rate townhomes at the site located at 32818 First Avenue South in Federal Way. We greatly appreciate the council's approval of the development agreement to allow the project to proceed forward in permitting. It's a high-quality development that provides new housing for families and working professionals in Federal Way. Intracorp has invested over 2 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars in entitlement costs to date, including securing the development agreement. So that our development may continue as planned, we are writing to request that the council's adoption of impact fees, if approved, provide an on-ramp to allow projects that are in the permitting pipeline to avoid the shock of such large and unpredicted fee increase. To our knowledge, Intracorp is currently one of few, or perhaps the only, market rate housing developer with a current land use application for multifamily development in the city. We are aware that other developers may have pursuits or may have become recently interested in developing in Federal Way. This is not a coincidence. While the Housing Action Plan concluded that the city has seen underinvestment in housing, you will recall that one of the key strategies identified in the Heartland study to encourage development was to eliminate the historically very high school impact fees, which effectively discouraged development. The City Council should be commended for your leadership in reducing the school impact fees in 2022. We appreciate your we appreciate your work on updating the land use code to support more housing. If the city provides a stable investment environment, as proposed below, we are confident that the other positive updates it is making to its zoning code will yield results in the form of desired middle-income housing. Intercorp's recent decision to close on the land for the project was due in large part to the City Council's decision to approve the development agreement and to reduce school impact fees for 2023. The project was underwritten, assuming no school impact fees and no park impact fees. Imposing significant new impact fees could threaten the viability of the project. We do not believe that is an outcome that's good for the city. We recommend the following solution. If the city is going to adopt these new fees, please provide an on-ramp, safe harbor for certain allocation of new housing in the permitting process or in the early stages of pre-development. For instance, the first 2,000 units of housing with a submitted land use application are guaranteed no school or park impact fees. Once that on-ramp allocation is filled, the new projects after that time will be subject to the new impact fees. This provides predictability for projects that are already subject to new impact fees and encourages new projects to submit their land use applications, while also allowing the city to gradually introduce their increased impact fees to the market. Even after this 2,000 unit on-ramp allocation is met, we encourage the city to provide for vesting to impact fees upon complete land use application. The effect of vesting to impact fees is the same concept as vesting to land use code regulations. It provides for certainty as to the fee amount. It does not mean that a developer does not pay the impact fees, only that they can plan for the required amount at the time when underwriting an investment occurs, at the beginning of a project entitlements, as opposed to the end. This on-ramp proposal will not allow only Intercorp, but other projects who underwrote a deal to zero impact fees and may be close to submitting a complete land use application to continue with their projects. With this solution, the city will maintain the current momentum towards housing development. It also provides for predictable implementation of impact fees. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment, anything online?
Nothing else.
Nothing
that-
online, and all saw the things that were sent in today or yesterday. Good. Thank you very much for addressing us so far. We'll have more discussion shortly in the agenda. So we'll move to committee business. Mr. Walsh, do you have anything, or Mr. Tran? Anything you need to bring up before we go in? Okay,
I would just
I
like
don't
to
have
go on
anything.
to move the approval of the minutes.
that's what I was gonna ask Ness.
Yep. I make
I
a
will
motion to approve
second
the
that.
minutes.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're gonna go to item number B, license agreement with the city of Kent. This looks like should be fairly straightforward.
Very much so, just the way I like them.
I like that.
All right? And I think I need to share, is the screen's already shared? Okay, I'm here today to present a limited license agreement with City of Kent. A little background on this is this limited license agreement between City of Kent, the City of Federal Way, will allow the connection on South 272nd Street between South Star Lake Road and Pacific Highway south of the Fiber Loop project. This is the area in question. Fiber Loop will be coming up Star Lake and then running along 272nd over to Pack. As you know, 272nd is City of Kent's right-of-way. So in order to create that last redundant loop, there's a bit of back and forth with City of Kent in order to accomplish that. Financial impacts. limited license agreement between the City of Kent and the City of Federal Way will be a no-cost agreement. Options considered today are options 1 or options 2. The mayor recommends option number 1.
Deputy Mayor Honda, you have a question?
Yes, does the City of Canton Council need to approve this too?
That's a great question. I do not know.
Okay.
I don't believe so.
Yes, they do.
They do.
Okay.
Okay,
Awesome.
sorry.
And they haven't done that yet?
No.
It's a parallel process. If I'm not, it's going to be a couple days one way or the other of who
Okay.
approves it first, but I'm not sure who is the lead.
Okay, no problem, thanks.
Okay, no other questions? Do we have a motion?
I have a question.
Oh. Is that Lydia? I don't see your
Yeah,
hand.
I
There
did
you are.
I did raise my hand, but I don't know what happened.
Well, you weren't on the screen, so I didn't see your hand, but now you are. Go ahead.
Okay, so when we say limited agreement, is that what I think it's temporary or limited? Can you define that for me?
Yeah, it's basically, it's limited to the point that it'll just be for the construction phase to get the conduit basically in the ground through the City of Kent's right-of-way. After that, ongoing agreements would be maintenance only, I believe. Maybe Jake.
And so that maintenance is our responsibility, correct?
Yes, ma'am, it would be our conduit, just in their ground.
Okay, so is there going to be some kind of an agreement to where they will not deny us the right to do maintenance? Because I didn't see that in what I was reading earlier, so just wanted that explained to me. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. Do I have a motion?
EJ, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to Councilmember Acefa Dawson's. Once the conduit's in the ground, there's no need to reopen it. You pull the wire subsurface, so any maintenance would be done that way.
Right. Then with
Okay,
that, I move to forward option 1 to the May 16, 2023 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to move to the resolution to set a public hearing date for the 2024-2029 Transportation Improvement Program.
Good evening, and see if I can get this working, since I always seem to have issues. Now.
Now I can see Lydia and Tron, so I can see your hands. Okay.
All right, so
Great, okay.
how about this then? All right, so,
Spirit.
and now I need to go back here. Yes, so the policy question is, should the council pass a resolution to set the hearing date for the adoption of the 2024 through 29 Transportation Improvement Plan on June 20th, 2023? So state law requires an annual update to the Transportation Improvement Plan, subject to a public hearing. And so staff proposes that public hearing to be held on the council meeting on June 20th. So options considered is to approve the proposed resolution or do not approve it and provide direction to staff. Mayor's recommendation is option 1, to forward the resolution to the May 16th consent agenda for approval. With that, happy to answer any questions.
I move to forward option 1 to the May 16, 2023 consent agenda for approval.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor? Say aye.
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 Okay, thank you, Mr. Perez.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Cole, we're going to talk about the Pacific Highway South Non-Motorized Corridor Phase 1 authorization to bid.
Correct.
Okay. Transit. There we go. And, okay, so Pacific Highway South Non-Motorized Corridor Phase 1, authorization to bid. Have a map here with the location of Phase 1, basically parallels Pack Highway, running south from Dash Point to just north of the high school at 304th. Project budget is, everything considered, 3.1 million, of which, I didn't total them. We have grant funding, federal, and REIT tax, fuel tax, and mitigation traffic impact fees. Options considered before you today is option number 1 and option number 2. Mayor recommends option number 1.
Okay. Any questions from anybody at the, yes?
Well, basically, we're just talking about sidewalks
Yes, ma'am.
from 304th to Dash Point.
Wider sidewalks, and they will be, like I said, parallel to Pack Highway, off of Pack Highway. Phase 2, once we get into that, we'll start beating the brush a bit more. We're getting off the paved road
Okay.
in public right-of-way.
That should help development along that road if that is finally done. because-
Also, safe routes to school
Right,
and such, yeah, absolutely.
thank you.
So I have a question that Council President makes me think about. When I come up from Dash Point Road, 509 to Federal Way High School, there's a nice sidewalk there that just got put in. Are we expanding that wider?
No, this is a different location.
Different
So this-
location, okay, sorry.
Highway,
we-
Christine used to have the project.
Are we coming up the side by Sacagawea? Is that where that's just gonna be?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
along 16th.
The
there.
place where I ride my bike, where there's all the potholes and the big cut in the side of the road?
Could be.
Okay,
Right now, there's like a 5-foot asphalt.
yeah,
sidewalk on there.
okay.
Down
And it's-
16th?
and it's
You're
gonna-
coming 16th, up the
Yes.
hill, right along Sacagawea Park, making it so nobody gets hit by a car when they walk up
Right,
there.
it's basically
Got
going to
it.
be replaced and widened to, it's either 10 or
Yeah.
12 feet, I think it's 10.
Okay.
Made into a path instead of a sidewalk.
Got it, okay. Any other questions from anybody out there? Do we have a motion?
Make sure I'm on the right one here.
I can make a motion, Chair.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, you're up.
Oh, okay. I move to forward option 1 to the May 16, 2023 City Council consent agenda for approval.
I second.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Okay, now to the first fun one. Item, not that yours weren't fun, believe me. You did anyway, I'm not suggesting it wasn't fun. Item E, ordinance for park impact fees. I'm sure we'll have lots of discussion and lots of questions.
All right. Good evening, Committee Chair Dovey, Council Members Tran and Walsh, Deputy Mayor Honda, Council President Coach Mar, and any council members on the line. I think Sefa Dawson, and I'm not sure if Norton's on. Before we use a code amendment to implement a park impact fee in the city of Federal Way. The Parks Deputy Director is here, as well as John Gillarducci from the FCS group. So we'll do this in a little different order. They'll provide more background. I'll address from planning the more procedural items that you typically hear, since this is a zoning code ordinance. The objective, there we go. The policy question is whether City Council should authorize the implementation of a park impact fee. The objective is to adopt a park impact fee chapter, so this would be a new chapter of Federal Way Revised Code, Title 19, our Zoning and Development Code, to help fund parks projects that are necessary to serve and mitigate impacts from future growth. In the adoption process, there was a SEPA determination of non-significance issued on February 24th. A Planning Commission public hearing was held on April 5th. After this meeting, it's forwarded on. It's recommended to go on to the May 16th council meeting. That would be a joint first reading and public hearing. So this would include a second public hearing and then a council second read and adoption on June 6th. There have been 4 written public comments, unless there were any that kind of came in at the very, very last minute. We had one come in today, and then another one come in late last week, and there were 2 submitted prior to the Planning Commission public hearing. So those should all be in your hands, in addition to the verbal comments you heard this evening. So Federal Way Revised Code 1980-130 is our development regulation amendment criteria, and the staff report speaks to how all of these criteria are met. The first one in particular, there is a comprehensive plan policy that specifically calls for the establishment of a park impact fee. And then the Planning Commission action, Planning Commission recommended that the proposed code amendments go on to City Council, and the mayor's recommendation is option 1, adopt the proposed ordinance. So with that, I'll hand it off to Jason to provide more background.
Good evening, council members. Most of you have kind of heard my spiel before, except for Councilmember Walsh. I don't think you've had that, but you know, the city has looked at implementing park impact fees several times in the late 90s, in the mid 2000s, and then we had the crash in the economy in 08, and that tabled it. And then recently, the interest has generated again. And from Parks Department standpoint, it's time to start, you know, assessing the park impact fee so that we can sustain and have a funding model for new parks that growth is going to impact. I know we're recommending as a department to do this on both residential and commercial properties, and that's based on just observation and seeing employees from other businesses utilizing our parks on their lunch breaks and that sort of thing, and having them pay their fair share. And so, as Evan mentioned, this falls right in line with our comprehensive plan and meets those goals, and just a dedicated funding source would be a welcome addition to the Parks Department. And with that, I'll bring up our subject matter expert, John Ghilarducci with the FCS Group.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, council members. So the way that we've set this up, a little bit of broad impact fee background, and then I'll summarize what's in the code, proposed code amendment, and then go quickly through the draft methodology and the calculations, and then we have some comparisons for you also. So an impact fee, if you're not immediately familiar, is a one-time fee paid at the time of development by new development. There are rules in the RCW, and we follow those very carefully in addition to case law. You see some of those summarized here. It's a payment of money imposed upon development as a condition of development. The facilities that are funded with impact fees have to reasonably be related to new development and benefit new development. The impact fees can't exceed a proportionate share of the cost of growth-related capital projects. We also have to show, you see in the second half of this slide, a balance between impact fees and other sources of funding. We can't rely solely on impact fees. In the case of a developer who builds one of the projects on the project list as a condition of development, you have to give them credit against the impact fee for their provision of that park in this case. And then also, we have to spend impact fees very carefully, only in conformance with the capital facilities plan element of the comprehensive plan. So we have to have an adopted list of projects and the impact fee eligible portion of each project noted in that capital facilities plan element. There's a 10-year limit on spending. So unless there is an extraordinary reason a city brings in impact fees, they have to spend the money within 10 years on eligible projects. This is a summary of the math. It's pretty straightforward. Focusing on that middle portion, what we're calling the future facilities component. This is where the bulk of the impact fee is. You picture a long list of projects. It's the growth-related portion of each project divided by the growth that it will serve. That gives us our future component to the impact fee. In the case of any existing capacity in the park system, surplus capacity that can serve growth, and there is a small existing facilities component available to us here. We can identify that and also divide it by the growth that it will serve, and that gives us an existing park system component. Together, they equal the total impact fee. And I'll come back and show you these numbers in a couple of minutes. First, as an outline of the proposed code update, we've got the title in the first section, the purpose and intent, findings and authority, which basically describes and assigns some of the language and procedures to the rate study. We have a long list of definitions that apply. We have the park impact fee methodology. This refers directly to the PIF study report. The impact fee applicability section describes who pays the PIF at the time of development, that being new development, all development activity. There's a provision for independent fee calculations in the case of a new customer for which there's not an applicable definition. They can apply for an independent fee calculation. There are exemptions. Residential additions, for example, are exempt. Redevelopment that doesn't add impact is exempt. Credits, again, for those developers who provide parks off of the project list, they get credits against the PIF.
Could I ask you one question right now when you said that? So when you said redevelopment doesn't have an impact, if someone tears a house down and puts a new one there, that would have no impact, is that
That's right.
correct? If someone tore a house down and put 6 houses on it, would that have an impact?
Yes, the 5 additional.
The 5 additional?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
There's a section providing for the establishment of park impact fee accounts to track receipts and expenditures, administrative rules and guidelines, refunds in the case of PIF funds not being spent within 10 years. There are refund provisions, and uses of park impact fees are defined. There's a provision for administrative fees so the city can recover the cost of administering the program. That's a very small markup. A process for appeals in the case of a new development disputing the imposition of the park impact fee, and then existing authorities unimpaired. So I will go through the draft methodology now. You've seen this slide before. We're going to focus first on the future facilities component. You'll note that that is the eligible cost of capacity increasing facilities divided by growth in system demand. So first, focusing on that denominator, growth. What you see is a compilation of projected growth in population. That's that top line. 2023 is the estimated current population. 2044 is the end of the planning period, and you see the projected population in 2044. The difference between those two, 21,808, is projected growth in population. That next line is projected growth in employees, those folks working in Federal Way. The 2023 estimate and the 2044 estimate you see there, the difference is projected growth in employees. We know that folks commuting to Federal Way and working here during the day don't have access to the parks at nearly the same rate as a full-time resident who has the parks available to them in Federal Way all the time. So we make an adjustment for that. An employee commuting to Federal Way is about 5% of the impact of a full-time resident. So that residential equivalent employees line is just those adjusted numbers, turning employees into resident equivalent employees. So the total expected growth in resident equivalent employees is only 966. And that 966 plus the projected population growth gives us our total expected growth in residential equivalents of 22,774. That's going to be the denominator in our calculations. You see a percentage next to that, 18, a little over 18%. When we have, when we're adding amenities to parks that will serve growth, but we're not adding acreage, we're going to say that those amenities will proportionally serve the existing population base and growth, and that 18% is that growth share. So you'll see that number again. Okay, our next challenge is to determine eligibility for those parks which are adding acreage to the city's existing inventory, and we'll show you those parks in a minute. What you see in that top table, top line, where it says park or natural area and the units being acres, the city's current number of park and natural area acres, 1,031, and then expressed as a level of service or a ratio. That 10.16 means right now there's a little over 10 acres of parks per 1,000 in population in the city of Federal Way. The project list is expected to add 7 acres to that inventory. Given the expected population growth and growth in employees.
Could you move the,
Oh, yeah.
so we can see that?
Sorry.
Okay.
Is that?
Yeah, looks
Okay.
great. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. That's the expected change in quantity, and I'll show you that list in a moment. We're expected to add 7 acres. So if you look down at the bottom table now, top row, the level of service is expected to be lower in 2044, 9.04 acres per 1,000, instead of the 10.16 that we have now. All that means is that by this approach, there's a small surplus of parks right now that's available to growth, and the 7 acres that will be added are 100% impact fee eligible. So that's all this math was for, to determine that eligibility. So this is the list of parks that will add those 7 acres. It's a short list: the Downtown Park Expansion and South Light Rail Station Park. And I'm saying they'll add acres, they'll add developed park acres. And I think in some cases, the city already has ownership of these parks. But that estimated cost, $16.5 million, is fully eligible for inclusion in the impact fee. There's a second list, much longer list of projects. We're calling that the infill list. These projects don't add acres, but they do add amenities to the city's existing parks that in some cases will be shared by the existing population and growth. In those cases, the PIF eligibility is that little over 18% you saw a couple slides ago. In the cases where we have projects that don't add any amenities that will be shared, that eligibility is 0. So you see a mix of 18% and 0% on this list. Down here, there's a bunch of City Hall amenities that are not included, for example. And then there are several pages to this list. Here's the second one. Again, updating the soccer field with artificial turf, a shared amenity, for example, and you see a number of these, 0 and 18%. So jumping to the bottom line, the list totals about 44.3 million. Of that, a little over 6.3 million is park impact fee eligible, and the remainder will have to be funded through other sources. So we combine the 16.5 million, which you saw in the expansion list, and the 6.3 million of infill projects, and our total future cost basis is 22.825 million. I mentioned a small surplus of parks. We use costs of recent park developments to estimate the value of that surplus, a little over $1 million. And together, we bring it all together on this slide, future facilities cost basis at the top, existing facilities cost basis, divided by the growth in residential equivalents, gives us a total park impact fee per residential equivalent of $1,048. We can then take this unit cost and, using average occupancies by dwelling unit type from census information that's specific to the city of Federal Way, we develop a schedule by dwelling unit type. So a single-family dwelling unit, a new one in the city, would be charged a maximum impact fee of $3,085. And a multifamily dwelling unit, because of the slightly lower occupancy, $2,524, and so on. That per employee rate, that's the basis of the non-residential charge. You don't actually charge it by the number of employees. You use that rate and industry information that links the number of employees and the average square footage per employee by business type to develop a schedule like this one. So if you were to pick, for example, retail, by this industry standard information, we calculate an impact fee of $117.54 for a new retail establishment per 1,000 square feet of leasable square footage. So, and likewise, these are the different business types available in the schedule.
So can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Go back to the 22 million, so the future facilities include $16 million for 2 parks. If we, and I don't even know that, I didn't know we were building those 2 parks. Maybe I did and didn't think about it. But if those 2 parks weren't there, we're talking about a PAC impact fee of $6 million that we would divide over all this, correct?
That is correct.
And are those on our, does anybody else know about those parks? I didn't think I knew about them. I don't know anything about them.
Keith has talked about needing a new park downtown.
If you could go back, do we have something on our plan that we're building another park downtown and we're doing something with the light rail?
I can answer a procedural component of that and then let Parks talk about the need for the parks specifically. But along with this specific proposal that's in front of you, which is a code amendment to allow for the park impact fee, there's also, it went before FEDRAC last week, a proposal to change the comprehensive plan to add those 2 parks.
Oh, I was at that meeting. I guess maybe I missed something. I mean, okay, well, I mean, the numbers would be totally different if we weren't spending 16.5 million for 2 parks. I mean, Keith, I'm sorry to be the guy who brings this up, but can you give me some information, please?
I can add my 2 cents and then I'll be happy to sit back down. So as we talked about downtown and the amount of housing units that are expected in that geography, and I think part of this was looking at the capacity of Town Square Park right now and thinking about another 5,000 people packing into that facility. It became clear to us and to Parks that we needed either an expansion on Town Square Park or another active recreational amenity in our downtown area. And likewise, as we're planning for a sub-area plan around the South Station, and sure that's a long ways away, but expecting to change some of that zoning down there to allow housing units, which is all commercial and industrial right now. There are no active parks down in the south part of town. So as we went through and talked about future needs, what our comprehensive plan right now doesn't have is that understanding that, yes, we've got 2 kind of clusters of housing that's on our horizon, and we need to plan for parks for them. So that's why the 2 new facilities
And you're right. I mean, so that's acquiring land and the improvements to the parks as well, which is why it's such a big number, where the others are just adding to stuff we already own.
Okay, so, I got one more question, then I'll go to either side of you. Since you did so well right there.
Trying to sneak away.
When I go through this presentation, it says you have 10 years to use the money you collect. So we're more probably, I don't know, I'm not going to be here in 10 years, but the South Park, that's a long way out. And if we don't spend if we don't buy that park, if we're collecting this money, is it earmarked? Do we have to give it back, or can it go to something else? I mean, it's like we're.
Let me give a quick one, and then I'll turn it over to John. So part of what we're talking about, so we're doing a sub-area plan for that area right now, and latest Sound Transit forecast is that station's going to come online somewhere around 2035. But
12 years.
I think what we're planning on is kind of like a phase one rezoning of certain parcels down in that part of town, which we know are underutilized right now. And we think that there could be some residential built even in advance of the station. So we don't know what the market is for that part of the city, just because it's been basically zoned out up until this point. So we would expect there'd at least be some demand created before that 12-year period.
Okay, thank you. Did Deputy Mayor Honda and Councilmember Walsh have?
Actually, the 12-year part and that answered my question.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Honda?
So currently we have, when you build something, you have to put money into parks. So how does this compare to a park impact fee?
So currently, we have mitigation fees.
Right.
And so if they don't build open space requirements, they can pay for a fee in lieu, and we collect that through mitigation money. Has the same 10-year fuse, and that's where we work with finance to get those spent. We come to council as needed on projects to get that funding allocated and then spent in those projects.
So how does that compare? How much money is collected from that as compared to a potential park impact fee?
And I don't have a good comprehensive on mitigation over time, but I can definitely tell you that this is going to generate way more funds than the current mitigation and fee in lieu is collecting.
So if, let's say, we have a park impact fee and we have all this development downtown, would the park impact fees have to be spent on something in that area?
Park impact fees can be spent on wherever the city deems correct and within city limits, as long as it's off of that infill list. And that's what I popped up for some clarification based on last week's meeting is, we jumped into the park impact fee study and we kind of saw where we were going. And these were the two developments that we knew were coming, knew were going to have an impact, and that we could implement in this round of the park impact fees. As we talked last week during FedRAC, we also have this PROS plan update that's coming in line and running parallel with the comprehensive plan update. And we know that that is going to generate a whole nother list of needs and wants. Pickleball courts aren't even in our current PROS plan, and we know how many calls we're getting on those, and many other things. And so that's where we wanted to get park impact fees implemented, and then the talk was after we go through the PROS plan, Parks Department would re-engage with FCS based on that new project and infill list to get that adopted, and that would be the new one. That's going to probably change once you get that infill list. It's going to allow that maximum to increase, but again, that's the maximum we can charge. It's up to this governing body to decide what we impose.
So I have one more question.
Go ahead.
So for the proposed new park downtown, is the location already decided where that would be?
No.
Because there's there's not that much space downtown too.
Well aware of that, and as well with the South Station, both of them. There was the recent, I forget if it was a letter of intent on the TC3 property, but those drawings that were improved and council moved forward on. It shows a nice big green space in the middle of that property, and so that was the information we're going off of. We know there's a need. We've got to support that need in the Parks Department. where exactly it's going to be developed, that's future conversations for all of us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting us interrupt you. Oh, excuse me, Councilmember President.
Yeah, that's okay. So I'm a little confused, not to say the least. So I thought we were already at our max. Where's Keith? Could you come back to the podium? We just love you, Keith. We're just going to put you on the...
I have not left the building, I promise.
So I thought we were at a max as far as, we had already met our quota for low-income housing, right? 40%?
So I would answer that question that no, it's not my understanding. I think where we are is we've got our new housing target for 2044, and that's 11,600 housing units. And of that, what's going to happen is we're going to get a certain number of housing units at different income bands.
Right.
And those numbers are still coming forward from Key
Right.
County. We don't have them yet.
Right, that's what I'm getting at.
yeah.
So, and we're also going to change the zoning in our single-family residential neighborhoods. So it seems like we're getting the cart before the horse. First of all, I've been told that our land, our dirt, doesn't accommodate higher income housing in our downtown, such as a higher end condo. Or so if we head only toward lower income and we keep providing, that's what we're going to get. What we need to do is provide our zoning so that we can get the market rate so that our future police officers, teachers can find a place to purchase first-time home buyer and then move upward. Because we've been concentrating so much on providing for folks to come live here, but we need to provide for people who already live and work here. And so that's what I'm concerned about. If we keep, why are we providing for parks for something that we haven't even determined what we're going to have yet?
So I think the narrative has changed a little bit, Council President Kochmar, in that, there was a time when we had basically 1,000 new affordable housing units came online with 3 projects, and that was all we had. And then we had some senior housing and some senior affordable housing. And now I think what is happening is you've got the project that's under construction right now at 1st and 348th, catty corner to the Wingco, which is market rate. This project that Intercorp is pursuing on the Old Valley site is market rate. The project that we have the letter of intent with Trent on for TC3, that's 900 market rate units. So the narrative, I think, is pivoting a little bit so that we are going to be better balanced. But you're right. If you look in the near-term rearview mirror, all that we got was affordable housing, both standard and senior recently. And so I think it's changing. And right now, the only thing that we know that's on our horizon from an affordable housing perspective is the Sound Transit surplus properties.
So my thinking is we really need to slow down a little bit on what our planning is going to be, because we're really not sure what that plan will be. I may be incorrect. I'm confused.
So I think to look at this, the way I would look at this, and you can look at it any way you want to, the way I would look at this is we know that there's a wave of new housing coming across our bow, and it's going to be the Old Valley site and the 320th site and the TC3 site. And as we add, 2,000 and 3,000 new housing units, probably in a short period of time, if we don't have our fees figured out, that will be that much less we will have to build new parks, because the demand is going to be there no matter what. Those people will generate that demand for park space.
I guess
Yes.
what I'd like to say now is my only concern is that thank God, we're finally getting some townhouses. I know so many seniors, believe me, I'm in the category, who they're not low income. They go to Lakeland Hills to live, they go to Northeast, because we don't have that kind of housing in our city. And it seems to me like we should be attracting that kind of housing, and they're not going to be, they're going to be on cruises. They're not sitting for that particular group of folks. But I'm really more concerned really with our first-time homebuyer folks, our children, who really are, I mean, right now, 100,000 seems to be an average income. So, and we are an affordable city, thank heavens for that. But I'd like to just switch us around a little bit so that we have an attractive, affordable city with people who have higher than normal educational degrees, that we can attract corporations, and hopefully we can work on our schools to get our schools up to par where we think they should be. And so my thinking is, I don't know how much we want to jump into planning more parks before we know what our zoning is.
And I'll get to you in a second, Lydia. I'm the one who kind of started this thing, I think, about bringing in impact fees. You know, if you think of the history, we looked at school impact fees and they were crazy stupid, and we said, let's get rid of them. And we did, and we got people who actually said, let's come into Federal Way. And I don't, you know, we've had testimony about putting impact fees on. I don't know where that's coming from, because I don't know anybody here that's saying we're putting them back on. But maybe there's something I'm missing. But this park impact fee is so we can maintain Celebration Park, like put on, you know, AstroTurf or whatever we call it that we've been talking about, or put a new playground in Wildwood, and the number goes up because we're talking about parks acquisition. But if we're going to have a very proactive approach to development, we need to give some consistency to our developers that said, we're going to maintain our parks, we're going to make it so people want to buy the properties they build or rent the properties they build. And this was all started so we can not get a big bill 5 years from now and we say, oh, we forgot to, you know, maintain our parks, and all these people show up because Sound Transit is going to happen and all these things are happening. So that's why we're talking about it. And it's really, in my opinion, comes down to what is the number. We don't want to charge a whole bunch to the houses, and if it's because all those people are going to use the park, so that's why I asked the question about 2 parks. I forgot that I know we hadn't talked about it, but the real number would only be $6 million you're collecting money on if you didn't have those 2 parks in there.
Yeah.
And Lydia's first, and then you're
okay.
next. Lydia, I'm told you have your hand raised for a question.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes. I do have a couple of questions, but before I get to the questions, I was listening to Council President and Coach Mar, and I don't know what the income level has to do with the type of parks that are being built, or what kind of projects are in our city. So I really wasn't sure, and I don't if I'm hearing what I'm hearing, then I did not appreciate that statement, because I think anybody who moves into our city, low income or high income or townhouses, they do deserve parks. We need to have access to parks. That's a comment based on what I just heard. But my question is, when you several questions, and this may be irrelevant or maybe I'm not understanding it, but when you were talking about employees and that in the formula, employees that come into our city, would it be also right to say that we do have residents here who are going to be working elsewhere? And could that be a wash? And I'm not saying it should be, I'm just asking a question, because that also, there are people who live here, who live in Federal Way and are in work elsewhere. So does that even come into the formula? And if not, why not? Again, it's a question, so please don't, And then my other question is, as we're with the parks, I thought I heard you say the new, the park impact fee is, how did you phrase it? I thought it had to do with the parks around the new construction, not necessarily citywide, or is it citywide? Or does my question even make sense?
I believe it's citywide.
It is.
Okay.
The city of Federal Way would be defined as a single service area. So, it would apply citywide, and the money can be spent citywide on projects that
Citywide
are on the
anywhere
list.
within our park system, old and or new parks, correct?
I'm sorry, what was that last?
So existing parks, new parks, it doesn't matter. It could be spent anywhere in our city within.
On the impact fee eligible portion of those parks, yes.
Got it.
The question about non-residential, so we do account for, in our calculations, folks who leave Federal Way to work in other cities. It's all accounted for. Many cities around us also charge a non-residential park impact fee. And so if the city, doesn't do it, and there are many who don't as well, I guess I'm trying to say there really isn't a wash there.
Okay. That was my question. I think that does, yeah. Thank you. That helps.
So may I respond to that?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Councilmember Seffa-Dawson. You're right. Income level should not determine the amount of our parks. And in fact, when the city incorporated, one of the first things this council members did, and I was part of it, as was Councilmember Dovey, was build up our parks. That was huge for us. That's why you have an 80-acre celebration park right now. That's why you have a lot of money that went to our parks right in the very beginning. Not only did we reserve the property, we developed the property. However, my concern really was that it seemed that we kept talking about the downtown area with parks in the downtown area where we would have a lot of congestion, not to mention traffic, with parks in that area. And so my concern really is let's stop before we start planning, I don't know what the number is, for our congestion in our downtown, and talk about how we're going to develop overall with our 11,600 targeted parcels.
Any other, I see two more blues.
Yeah, okay.
Susan, Deputy Mayor Honda, you first, Jack
Jack
next.
was first.
Okay.
Okay.
All
you're
right,
first.
a couple of things. One is the open space in TC3, that could be one of those two parks, correct? Am I?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah,
And if
okay.
the developer wanted to build that developer would get credit for the park impact fees.
Okay, all right. Okay, and then that was one of them. Secondly, I mean, I guess that later on we'll probably discuss the amount of impact fees, but I'm concerned on the amount. And also the idea of impact fees on businesses also, even though it's only a 0.05, 5% thing. I think that we are going to be getting residential growth one way or another. And I think that we need to do all that we can to make Federal Way an attractive place for business. And if a business is going to employ 100 people, all of a sudden that's a substantial, 100 people or 200 people, that's a substantial amount of impact fees there. And so I'm concerned about it going to businesses as well, because I think that we're going to have a harder time attracting business than residential. But I'm concerned. I mean, I think that the impact fees for parks, I think that's important. I'm a little bit concerned about the size that's being proposed, the amount of the impact fees, and anyway, but go ahead.
Sorry, if I could just.
I guess it goes back to Susan.
If I could just jump in really quickly to answer that question, and I suspect that all the council members are aware of this. I just want to state it again to be clear. The numbers you see up there next to these here are numbers that the methodology that FCS Group has created spits out as the maximum possible amount that could be legally imposed as part of these developments. Just like school impact fees and other impact fees, you guys set the amount of that impact fee yearly when the fee schedule comes out. So you're not, by this action, let's say, for instance, you adopted this exact methodology, you are not setting an impact fee, a park impact fee for single-family dwelling units of $3,085. You're merely adopting methodology that would allow you to impose up to that amount as part of the actual fee schedule. As part of the fee schedule, you could set that number at 500. You could set that number at 0. You could set that number at 2,500, whatever it is that you see fit to impose at that point. So I just want to make the distinction. This isn't setting the amount of the impact fee. This is setting the methodology that supports the maximum amount that impact fee could be.
All right, thank you.
Before Deputy Mayor Honda, because you said something, I want to ask a question. We're setting the formula, but if we don't want the formula, the percentage the way, and we wanted everybody to pay the same, would that upset the formula, or could we do that also?
So I believe that question is a question, could we, instead of distinguishing between single-family, multifamily, manufactured homes, accessory dwelling units, could we combine those into just a single dwelling unit category and have a number per dwelling unit? Yes, we could legally do that, and that is something that I believe FCS could do with their methodology without an immense amount of heartache. Sorry, John, if I
Right.
spoke for you.
No,
there,
that's
but-
right. It would take an initial iteration of analysis, but it is absolutely positive and defensible, possible and defensible, yeah.
Deputy Mayor Honda?
Thank you. So we've seen impact school fees for surrounding districts and cities. Could we see impact fees for all the impact fees that maybe Renton, Kent, and Auburn have, so that we can compare them to ours?
That's coming.
That's coming?
Yeah, couple slides.
We're ahead,
Awesome.
yeah.
And also, I think it's important to realize that we're not, we need to plan for the future, as the other councils did before us. And we have an exciting future in Federal Way, but we need to be ready for it, and we need to be planning for it. And it means making some really difficult decisions that are going to be difficult, and not everyone's going to like them, but we need to make them for the future of Federal Way.
That's why we're having this discussion.
Yep.
So what you see on this slide is that table of comparisons that you just asked about. These are park impact fees for single-family residences in a handful of neighboring communities, some more neighboring than others. You'll see even at the proposed level, Federal Ways would fall at the bottom of this list. Of these, Issaquah has a non-residential fee. Redmond has a non-residential fee. Kent has a non-residential fee. We know Tukwila does, just as examples, and the rest of them have only residential park impact fees. I wanted to go back and just touch briefly on the 10-year question that came up, because the cost recovery of the revenues that are forecast to be generated from the park impact fee will occur over 20 years. That's the planning period. And we know that during that time, there's going to be high and low growth years. So, and there's a long list of projects, including the 2 expansion projects. It's very unusual that agencies have any difficulty getting money collected in year 1 out the door before year 10. So I just wanted to give you that reassurance. And as far as taking projects off the list, because a project has to be on the list in order to spend impact fee money on it, it's at least a strategy to consider to leave the projects on the list, set the fee lower to what you believe the market will bear. But if the projects are still on the list, you at least then have the flexibility to spend impact fee money on those projects when it does come time to build them.
One question on this list. This happens to be for single-family homes. Is there a list like this for apartments and ADUs or anything like that, or is that at the next page I haven't seen yet?
It's not, we didn't dive that deep. It takes surprisingly a little bit of research to get in and look at the actual structure of each one to see if what their dwelling unit types are and the charges by type of dwelling unit. It's pretty easy to just stick to single-family residences.
And this is what you do, part of what you do for a living. I mean, you're an expert.
That's right.
You know more than we do, so that makes you an expert. What's your gut tell you about what is charged per door for apartments and ADUs I mean, do you have any grenade-level idea?
You mean in
I
these
mean,
other
if-
locations?
If I went to Kent and I put in a multifamily building, they're gonna have a park impact fee.
Right.
It's not a single-family home, but it's a multifamily. Do you have any idea what the number would be?
It will be a portion of that 3,904 based on the average occupancy for a multifamily dwelling unit,
Which
which is
is
probably
the-
going to be a similar ratio.
Which is the same ratios that we
Similar.
have. So they would.
In all
take the
likelihood.
Same ratios, assuming they have the same top-line number, 22 million. It's gonna vary based on what the total number is, right?
Again, I don't have the schedule in front of me, but it would be based on the average occupancy, which
which
is
was
probably
that-
similar to federal ways.
Which is that schedule you had 2 pages back, which you figured that out.
With one
These numbers, right,
caveat,
yeah.
certain cities, and I can speak for Issaquah and Kirkland, have waived impact fees for ADUs as a way to make them more affordable for portions of their community.
Which would be counterproductive to having people use the parks. You'd waive them for somebody who's gonna use the park, which is counterproductive to being equal to everybody. But I get it. Okay, thank you. That cleared it up.
My question earlier on impact fees for surrounding cities is all impact fees, not just park impact fees?
Oh, okay, these are just parks.
Yes, yes.
And that was in the Heartland report. I can send you that graphic.
Okay.
Which
I'd
is actually
appreciate
our-
it.
Which is actually our next topic, the Heartland Report.
I don't have it on my, I don't have it here.
It's right on the next. Okay.
That's all my prepared material.
One last question?
Yes, please.
So, right after on your attachment, right after your comparisons, which you have up on screen, the next section is page 12, which talks about park impact fee study, and it comes up to 6 million, which it looks like for us the total amount that we're planning on spending for the neighborhood parks and so on in the city of Federal Way. Is that the 6 million? How are we coming up with it? I mean, are you
Have that number.
figuring that that's the amount of money that we would get from a park impact fee, and that's what you want to spend this on?
No, that 6 million is total projects that we have approved on the books that qualify
see.
for the methodology for this study. And so, like I mentioned, right now, that's what is council approved on the books, and we could have John calculate to
Oh,
figure
so-
out what our maximum fee is.
Oh, so if we
That
got the
could
fee, that's
change.
what we could spend it on?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Of that 6 million, because the total was 44, so that tells you there's a big chunk of
Sure.
maintenance and repair
Right.
and replacement that the city is still on the hook for, that park impact fees will not pay for.
Yeah, well, that answers my question, because I was concentrating on the downtown core, but you appear, this is all over the city.
Correct.
Yeah, that wasn't clear to me in the beginning, thank you.
I apologize.
One, he's distracted, so I'll go ahead and talk since the chair's not paying attention anyway, so anyway. So, you know, one thing that Keith and I were talking about earlier is that you have it so that you know, figuring that a single-family dwelling has higher occupancy than an apartment does. You know, but I'm thinking about my experience raising a family for 38, almost 39 years in Federal Way, and my kids growing up here. And we had a neighborhood park right down the street, but a lot of the time, they and the 22 kids that were in our cul-de-sac were entertaining 22 kids in the cul-de-sac at one time, under 14 years old. So anyway, and then it went down to like 3 kids, and now it's back up to about 10 or 12. So I mean, we're getting kind of a new wave. I mean, it's for a while it was kind of newlywed or nearly dead, and I was one of the nearly dead. So anyway, but we're starting to get a few of the middle in there once again. So, but our kids spent a lot of time in the cul-de-sac and the yards. They did go down the park some, but where with apartments there might not be as many people per unit, but they don't have the amenities there in their home to be able to spend time there. So so as I see it, they're gonna be down at the parks more. So it seems to me as though it should really be more a flat rate, whether it's apartment, whether it's single family, that there should be a flat rate with it and not penalize the single families. I mean, my park impact fee was replacing our front window because it was the home run on the, in the cul-de-sac. So anyway.
There are many agencies that do that, that have just one charge per dwelling unit regardless of the type of dwelling unit. I'd say the majority do have these dwelling unit distinctions like we've shown you tonight. I've heard examples just to present the other argument. It's obviously it's whatever you choose to do going forward, but there are also those multifamily complexes that might have a swimming pool or other amenities on the site that you could argue then may mean that less of those residents are using parks. So the problem is we don't have real good data that tells us what types of users are using the parks. So these all fall back on number of occupants. We're just going to assume that more occupants is more park use. But you're presenting some really good reasons why that may not be that straightforward.
But overall, I mean, I as I see it, it should be equalized, and if this is the max that can be justified, I'm all right with that, but what we need to actually implement, at least initially, is a lot lower than that to help the developers and make sure that Federal Way is a friendly environment for developers, and also having probably being, I'm not sure about the 1,000 and 2,000 things before that type of what did you refer to it as an on-ramp, but certainly maybe that, but certainly have it so that the impact fee is determined at at application rather than at permitting. And so that right up front, they're knowing what it is when they apply, not down the road however long it takes to permit, and hopefully our departments can do the permitting very quickly, but they should know it at application. Those are my comments. And I'll turn it back to the chair since he's back at his desk.
You got to vote on this. I guess a question or maybe a summary. If we move forward with park impact fees, what I'm hearing Kent say is we're not really setting the prices. We're setting the study numbers based on the list of things that we need to do and the valuation of everything, the 22 million, and then on the list, and that's all we could do. Now, if we come back, if we pass this out of committee, I mean, you'll have to answer this, we could sit down and say at the next reading, well, we've decided it should be equal, we're not going to use the ratios, we want it to be $1,000 per door, however that allocation's put together, and make that changes before it becomes in the code or becomes a number?
So the opportunity to set the actual fee will come, I believe, and Evan, if I'm wrong about this, please correct me. I believe that opportunity will come at the exact same time as second reading on this ordinance, as well as the comprehensive plan amendment ordinance. There's a third item that will be considered at the same time, and that's the update to the fee schedule. And it's that update to the fee schedule, that resolution, that's where the fee will actually be set.
Because I tend to agree with Deputy Mayor Honda that we have to be forward-thinking and do this. I think that's what she said, because we have to maintain our parks, and we have to plan for the growth of what's coming in, 11,000 homes. What's really debatable in my mind is what's the number going to be when we start, and it could go up over time, correct? Kent, I mean, if we don't have any growth and it's a very small number in the next 3 years, and then there's this onslaught of 8,000 homes getting ready to come in, or apartments or whatever, that number could vary and change as the population changes.
Yes, indeed, as the population projections change, the number that's spit out by FCS Group's methodology is going to also change to some degree over time. And then additionally, yes, there's always the ability yearly by the council to reset the fees.
And so where I'm going before I let somebody else talk, so if we know we have to do something so we can maintain our parks and make us a livable community for people who want to be here, my opinion, not maybe everybody's, my opinion. But we want to be open for business, so developers say, hey, we want to come to Federal Way. So we have to start the process and we can maintain how much it is, if anything, in the beginning, and then change it as we go. Is that correct? The number.
Yes, that's correct. And I should also, I'm not, forgive me if I'm verging a little bit off of your question here, but similar to recent discussions we've had with respect to school impact fees, there is nothing that would prevent the council from adopting a cap for a certain period of time on the amount. There's nothing that would prevent the council from putting in code the amount of the park impact fee shall be zero through the end of 2025. There's nothing that would prevent the council from saying the first 1,000 or 2,000 units, as you've heard tonight. All of those are options. All of those are options.
So, okay, Councilmember President Kochmar, you're first, and then Deputy Mayor Honda, and then, has anybody got their hands raised? Any hands on there? No, okay. You not?
No.
Deputy Mayor Honda?
Is this a current picture of Stewart Lake Park from the air, an aerial view?
Yeah.
It is. I think it was a drone photo that we had.
Well, if, there's a lot of potential there, and, well, they're all, I've always wanted Still Lake. I grew up going to Still Lake. In fact, I almost drowned there when I was a little girl. Yes.
That's a great endorsement of it.
And you
Yes,
still
it
go
is.
there.
I was saved by the lifeguards. But there, one reason we need money for our parks is because this park has such potential and it's so used. And either we need to get some kind of funding from somewhere, not necessarily from this park impact fees, to redo this park, because there's so much space that needs to be used there. It could be such an amazing park, like an inclusive park in some parts of that area. However, look at all that area that needs to be, it's just crying out to be redeveloped. I'm just saying that, let's think about what parks will bring businesses, parks will bring people to Federal Way, and parks will bring people who want to live in Federal Way. We have to have good parks.
I agree 100%. We
But
need
look at that park, it just says
if we had better watering on that day, it would look green in this picture, if it rained. Well, I don't know if there's a motion, but I'd like to, go ahead.
I just have three things. I just want to make sure you guys understand that when staff worked with FCS, equity was the main reason on that methodology. And so it doesn't matter what type of housing you live in, it's residential equivalence. So that's how that methodology works. So there's evenness there. If we had started during incorporation with park impact fees, and there's been some estimates on what we could generate, and at 3 to 7, it depends. It could be lower, it could be higher, but let's just say we missed $1 million in impact fees since incorporation. We're down 30 million to develop our parks. Let's say it was a good years, and we 5 million. That's 150 million we have let out the door because we're not charging park impact fees. So it's imperative to the Parks Department and future development of parks. The other one that was interesting that I thought came out, I think it was at the last LUTC, was there was talk about, and I believe it was the city of Redmond, and when they imposed higher park impact fees, it seemed to spur higher levels of development rather than the inverse. So, just needed to make those statements before you guys took your vote.
That's not a good comparison.
Yeah.
Redmond has Microsoft there. They have, they have major corporations already there. So it's kind of hard to do an apples to apples comparison. Just want to be cognizant of the fact that we need to grow our city, but how are we going to grow it? That's all. Thanks.
Yeah, and I would simply say, looking, at the Issaquah impact fees, that it's about 3 times what the maximum would be proposed here. But if you take a look at a single-family home, it's, in Issaquah, it's probably 3 times the average single-family home in Federal Way also, so it's really quite proportional, I think. So, ours should be lower, or should indeed be lower.
Well, I would like to ask someone to make a motion that we move forward with the impact fees with the caveat that we know we haven't baked what the number is. Is that how we move it forward?
I don't think you have to explicitly say that. I think that's just how it will
understood
function
as-
if you move it forward, correct?
So if we move this forward, it could be, when it comes before the full council or staff, we could work on changing it so it was equal per type of housing, or not having the business, or, I mean, that would still be subject to discussion.
It would still be subject to discussion. I would suggest from a staff preparedness and ability to modify the FCS study as well as the code language and other things that need to be modified. I would suggest, though you're not required to, but I would suggest making that type of a motion to amend it or to have staff work on it to accomplish that type of an amendment prior to the council hearing. In other words, that would be a forward to council with X modification.
So that would mean sitting together with Keith, like we sat down for all the other meetings, and kind of talk about how we're going to craft this, is that correct?
That's
Like we have Kent.
practically one way that could be accomplished, yes.
So would it be appropriate for me to make a motion at this time that we forward it to for discussion to the full council, but that the staff be prepared with figures on what it would be, what the maximum
We're
would
going to
be
have a
if-
meeting. We're going to have a meeting like we've had for the
Friday.
downtown.
Well, okay,
We have a meeting on Friday.
Huh?
We have one on Friday,
We have it on Friday.
right?
so.
Could we-
So what should be coming out of this meeting
Can I
right
ask a
now?
question before you make your motion?
Yes, you may.
So, we've been offered some suggested amendments. Do those need to go into something like this today, or can those, if that is something that council is interested in, does that happen later?
So there's a couple different ways it could happen. It could happen informally between, you could move just to simply forward it to first reading on May 16th and discuss informally with city staff potential changes prior to that first reading. That's one way of doing it. You could also say, for instance, I move to forward the proposed ordinance to first reading on May 16th with the modification that the impact fee be the same for each type of dwelling unit. And that would prompt staff to make those assuming that passed, that would prompt staff to make those changes prior to the council meeting.
If we wanted to say for the first 1,000 housing units, it doesn't count, that would be,
That's also something you could specifically put in your motion to move it forward if you wanted to.
okay, well, I don't vote on this committee, I'm just wondering.
Yes, absolutely.
And with that, with the first 1,000 units, we could okay. So we would want, the motion now, we would want to have it so that staff could be prepared. And then I think we could discuss this with staff later on,
So if that's the suggestion, I suggest simply forwarding the proposed ordinance to first reading on that date and then having internal discussions subsequent to that. But I think that a simple motion along those lines would effectuate what you're talking about, Jack.
With no recommendation?
It would be, yes, it would simply be forwarding it to first reading.
okay. Let's see, where's the,
Mr. Chair?
Yes, I didn't see a hand, but you're up. Go ahead.
So, since, I mean, it seemed to me like we have more questions, would it make more sense to postpone this ordinance until next LUTC meeting?
I don't think it does make sense to move it to next LUTC because of the timelines to get these things done, but I think it does make sense that we move it forward, and then we're going to meet, we have a meeting on Friday where we're gonna be able to discuss maybe some emotions, and then at the next council meeting, when it comes forward, be prepared to bring in some other motions, like how many houses, if we're gonna exempt it, what the price looks like. But I think we want to keep the thing moving ahead and not lose, I mean, that's my feeling.
Is there a time crunch?
So the main time pressure here is that the comprehensive plan amendment, which granted is not this specific item, but it's very tied to this item. The comprehensive plan amendment has to happen coterminously with a amendment to the city budget, which is scheduled for a specific date certain currently. That's one of the few times when we can adopt a change to our comprehensive plan mid-year as opposed to on the yearly schedule. So that is the time pressure.
And you don't know when that date is?
Yeah.
June 6th.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's very
The
soon.
schedule adoption, the code amendment, and the comp plan amendment are all on a current track to
June
the
6th,
June
okay.
6th meeting.
Okay. I move to forward the proposed ordinance to first reading on May 16th, 2023, and ask that staff be prepared to discuss with us prior to that time possible amendments to it. Did that work, Kent?
I'm not sure you have to put
That's
that
a motion.
part of it in. I mean, that's a little bit too, maybe more specific, but I say move it forward and then know that
Can
there's,
you repeat it?
yeah.
What? Repeat it?
I would suggest that staff is always ready to discuss
Okay.
amendments to. things
Given
with
that our
council
staff
members.
is always ready to discuss amendments, I move to forward the proposed ordinance to first reading on May 16, 2023.
I'll second that.
Okay, and before we vote, Lydia, you have your hand up?
I think my question was answered, so I'm okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Okay. We're gonna have a meeting. Okay. Now we're talking about Housing Action Plan Implementation Code amendments. And before I get there, you know, we've had and maybe this will be under here, school impact fees is that something we're gonna talk about here?
Yes.
Okay, got it. I remember now. Go ahead.
If you don't want to, let me know quickly.
Really like zero for a long time.
Okay. Good evening. Sorry. Okay. Good evening, Chair Dovey, committee members Tran and Walsh, Council President Kochmar, Deputy Mayor Honda, and Council Member Sefa Dawson. So this is the second time for the Housing Action Plan implementation. Code amendments, we were at, well, not I was in Philadelphia. You all talked about this in April, and there were only a few questions, but let me start with the policy questions. Should the City Council adopt various amendments to Title 19 Federal Way Revised Code that are responsive to the study conducted by Heartland LLC as part of implementation of the Housing Action Plan? And if you remember, there were 9 recommendations from Heartland, and I can talk about all of these tonight if you want, but I really want to focus on 2 of them, because 2 of them, I think there were questions raised, both at the LUTC meeting and subsequently from members of the community. So the second one and the 7th one, number 2 is reduce the amount of ground floor non-residential space that is required, and number 7 is provide predictability for school impact fees.
Could I, before you get going, could we also talk about number 8?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We can do that after we do school impact fees. Okay, so So Heartland's recommendation was to reduce the amount of retail commercial space required and provide clarifications to the wording. And Councilmember Walsh asked a question. You know, the way that this reads right now in the code is 60% of the ground floor on the major street, but then 40% on all the other frontages. And it really is confusing in how it reads. And it results in an awful lot of ground floor retail space. And what we're trying to avoid, and you can't see probably from this photograph, is these spaces, this is on Main Street in Auburn, these are empty. And I think what we're trying to do is find the right amount of ground floor retail space that will activate our streets without having so much that we have a bunch of empty storefronts, because empty storefronts is not the vision we're trying to accommodate here. So one of the questions that was asked was, how does this actually play out? And this was Councilmember Walsh's question. And if this is your site and you've got two buildings, and this is your primary access down here on kind of the bottom of the screen, what it says is 40% of this building frontage along that street needs to be non-residential. And so those are those two retail spaces you see on this ground floor. This frontage, here's another street, so this is at a street corner. Because this is not the primary frontage, these can be residential. And because this building is not adjacent to the primary street, the entire building can be residential on the ground floor. So what this does really is, and this is in theory our whatever, if this is at the corner of two streets, you know, this would be the major street, whatever it might be, whether it's Pack Highway or 320th. So you'd have basically almost half of that ground floor being retail space with either residential or other uses filling up the rest of the ground floor. Now, that's for BC, the community business zone, and city center frame. In the city center core, what the current code reads is 100% of that ground floor plate needs to be non-residential space. And what we heard from Heartland is that's too much. So we initially dialed it back to 25%, and we've been engaging with a developer that's looking at a piece of property in our city center core right now, and they're saying that that 25% is still too much. So what we've suggested is dropping it again a little bit to 15%. And what that shows up like on these same two building footprints that we saw in the last slide is you've got 15% on this building and then 15% on this building. So it's by building within the city center core. And there's a reason why we're doing it differently in the city center to make sure that more of that street frontage has some of that ground floor space. So again, this is an attempt, I think, where we are trying to find that right space in terms of requiring enough that's maybe making the development community a little bit anxious, but not so much that we're going to end up with a lot of ground floor empty retail spaces. And so right now, the proposal is 15% within the city center core.
Between
and I'm
these
sensing you want to pause.
Well, yeah, well, between these two maps, I mean,
Yep.
they're not side by side, so what's the actual difference in square
footage?
Yeah, less.
Yeah, so what I would say is, if you look at these, this one's probably ends up being less because there is none on this space. And also, I don't want to reflect that this is every development scenario. This one where you've got two buildings on one parcel. Like for Kitt's Corner, this building here, which is tucked back, there are many buildings tucked back on that property because it's such a big property, and that's BC, so this would apply to that particular project. And part of, as we think about, the street that's going to connect in between the existing Devco project and what might be built on that currently forested Kitt's Corner parcel, that back street, which is 13th, having retail on that space it won't survive. There won't be enough visibility or street traffic to keep any retail afloat back there. So part of this is trying to think about all the different scenarios so this works depending on what the property configuration is. So that's the first item we're going to talk about. The second one is schools. Are we going to stick with this?
Rhonda has a question.
So, down in Auburn with the retail space on Main Street, that was, you know, when they did their housing down there.
Yep.
I've been told by some of the folks down there that that retail space wasn't really thought out very well because they didn't you can't have a restaurant in there. It was just not built to accommodate what kind of retail they might have been able to have there.
I've heard that as well. I've also heard that there's cheaper spaces available elsewhere, and it's not such a prestigious location that it's demanding that higher per square foot rent, and so it's got a couple different problems with it.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things where I would hope that once we get the first few projects built and we get more density within our city center core, that we come back and revisit this and push those numbers up. One thing we heard from Heartland, which I absolutely buy into, is you can't just flip a switch and have a walkable, vibrant urban center. You have to actually build the units, you have to get people living there, and then they walk around and they find services and other places to shop and kind of go around, and that the city could look to increase that square footage over time as we start to densify our city center.
So on that theory, scarcity makes it more valuable. Why wouldn't we make it less than 15% when the first ones in don't have the retail requirement as much, so that when the next ones come in, they become more valuable because the coffee shop realizes there isn't any space here, I better get in now. It's only going to be 10%. Is 15% the sweet spot, or should it be less? Excuse me, I didn't have my mic on.
No, I heard you yelling at me. No, I'm just kidding.
It's my hearing aids, and I wasn't yelling.
I'm just teasing. So when I got the phone call, and the phone call was from a developer looking at the old Azteca, I guess it's called the old Azteca site.
The old.
And it's got a bit of a slope to it. And they said they've done some site plans, and they think they can only get 12.5% of kind of viable retail space on the ground floor. And I said to them, look, I said, we picked a number. I got this 15%. I looked at Trent's site plans, and on Trent's site plans for TC3, and now that's flat, 15% was in each of the buildings. So I think this is doable from a market standpoint. I think probably the 25 was too high, but I think 15, I'm comfortable with 15, but the promise I made to the developer who's looking at the old Azteca site is bring in some site plans, let's look at it, and if ultimately this 15 looks like it's too much after, some deeper dive, we've got another set of code amendments kind of running behind this housing action plan code amendments for our downtown that are coming, probably more like September-ish, October. So we can always adjust it again in the second half of this year.
Okay. Go ahead.
Could we do, for example, if they do a study and it looks good to us, can we do a spot adjustment, or does it have to be the same for everybody? Could we say, hey, it's 15%, but hey, you show that it works for 12.5% or whatever, and not for more? Can we do that, or would that be something we could not do?
You could add a provision in the code that allows the director to vary the standard by like up to 5%.
And just to jump in there, Keith, I do believe, my initial inclination is that the standard variance procedure in code would apply to this note. So there is already a variance procedure that would allow, so long as you meet certain criteria, to vary from that requirement. You could also, if you wanted to, adopt a specific variance that's specific only to that section of code as well. That's an option, but there is already at least a variance process that
All right.
applies.
Okay, good.
Yes, we do. Okay, and on those lines, the next conversation we're going to have this evening is about school impact fees. Mr. Morrison, as well as representatives from the school district, provided public comment at the last LUTC meeting. I think a couple things that I heard were, one, providing an allowance that allows the school district to potentially adjust for projects that are generating more than one kid per door. Also, I think the question was asked, how long does it take to get a permit? There's a joke there somewhere, I'm sure, but I think the answer is probably more or less 2 years. And so the predictability piece, how do you understand it up front? And I think we try to address both of those in the proposed amendments that are coming, and so I'll walk you guys through those, and then we can see whether we got there or not. So the first one is for studio, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom in the city center and the BC zones, school impact fees would be codified at 0. And the reason why we did this is there's two things going on here. One is the city center and the BC zones are our densest residential zones, so that's where we see most of the housing being built over the next period of time. The reason why we were specific on studio, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom is if you had a project being built at 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, or 5 bedrooms, they're going to generate more kids, and it seemed like having the impact fee at 0 was probably not appropriate. So we basically said, if you're one of those bigger units, you then, even if you're in the city center and the BC zones, you then fall down into item number 2, which is the rest of the city. And the rest of the city, one of the questions I heard Councilmember Walsh ask was, well, those proposed caps that were in the previous version of the ordinance, do those include those $20,000 a year school impact fees? And the answer was yes. And I took it one step further and I said, well, what if we consider those anomalies and take them out of the average? And if you take out everything over $15,000, what it does is it turns those impact fees into these caps. So what used to be kind of, I think, 5 and 4,000 or whatever those numbers were previously, it dramatically reduced them to 3,600 for single family and 2,222 for multifamily. And so I think those take us back to about 2010 in terms of when those impact fees were at about that level, which for me, if I was, I know Mr. Morrison and Mr. Avenel have interest in properties that aren't zoned BC or CCC or CCF, rather RM. So the RM multifamily would fit into this at 2222. And the third item here is a standard 5% inflation rate annually. So if the council, and again, part of this, similar to the conversation about park impact fees, you guys don't have to establish this cap. This would be, if you were going to establish it, it would be no higher than this. But let's assume that you said, all right, let's set it at 2222 for multifamily. In 2 years, the time it would take for Mr. Avenel to get his permitting, that 2222, I wrote it down somewhere, good Lord. I think it goes to about $2,400 a door. So yes, they would assume that worst case scenario, that you guys set it at 2222 and it increases each year for 2 years at 5%, they would have to underwrite that $2,400 per door as the worst case scenario for school impact fees. So the way this is currently drafted, and again, I think part of what we're going to decide is this where it's going to land or is it going to move from here, is they would have to assume that worst case scenario it would be about $2,400 per door for school impact fees. And again, I think that it's predictable and it's much more reasonable than the $20,000 a door it was in 2021.
So my question is, we only get 1% for the state. So why are we going 5? It should be 1. We should be consistent with what cities have to do with.
Property tax?
Yeah, we only get 1%. I mean, why do we go in 5 when everybody else gets 1? So that's my first thing. And I don't know why it's 2024. We're trying to tell people we're open for business. Why can't we make that 2027? So that all the stuff that we're working on can actually get through here. And we could do that if we wanted, correct?
Absolutely. All those are within your choice in terms of where you want to set this thing rolling.
I mean, there's going to be a day when school impact fees need to be collected. We've heard about it for parks. We're catching up right now. School impact fees have been the bane of our city for the last 5 years. So why don't we take care of the city first instead of the schools? These kids aren't going to show up for at least 5 years because they're not going to be built. So let's give the people that want to build in our city predictability, move it out to a reasonable time. And of course, this is just me speaking, 2027 or something like that, that lets the influx come in, give them put the numbers in, and then give a 1% growth instead of 5%. And then you got a formula the way I look at it. But Jack?
I just think, and instead of 1% or 5%, I mean, I would propose something like the lesser of either 5% or the CPI, the lesser of the two. And so, I mean, if inflation goes crazy, they'd get 5%. And if it's goes down to where it ought to be, it's not going any more than what the CPI is. I mean, that's what makes sense to me.
But we don't get that here at the city. Why are we enabling somebody else?
So, anyway, just a thought.
A note, if I might, Chair. The current drafting, Keith, and this may be drafting that does not meet the intent of staff, but the current drafting says that for more than 2-bedroom units in city center and BC, there is no cap, is how the current language reads. So if you have a 3 or more unit development in city center, CCF or BC, currently the draft, as it's technically written, says there is no cap on that. If that's unintentional, we should change that, but I just wanted to mention that.
That would be unintentional.
Okay.
I assumed it would ratchet down to
Okay.
what's being charged in the rest of the city.
Deputy Mayor Honda?
Thank you. Do school impact fees have to be spent also within 10 years?
Yes.
So let's say we started collecting school impact fees in 5 years, if the school district requested that we start collecting impact fees. So the kids would have to already be there for them to have the formula. If building isn't going to be, you know, if it takes 2-3 years to get a permit, we're not going to see any school impact fees increasing, period, because the students aren't there yet. So at least for the next few years, it will be 0.
My understanding is that it's likely going to be 0 again for 2024.
Yeah, that's what we've been told.
Yeah. So to your point, yes, I think the way that they do their capital facilities plan is it's reactive to the housing that we're permitting. So once the housing is getting permitted, then they assume that that housing is going to generate a certain number of kids in that 5-year time frame. And then they look at which school those kids are going to go to. And if those schools need additional facilities, it then works its way onto their capital facilities plan, which then justifies a school impact fee for those projects. It's the way that that works, is the way I
And then
understand
they
it.
have, after they collect them, they have 10 years to spend them.
Yes.
Because it takes a while to put together a plan to get money to build a school, so that's really a tight timeline for them.
Yes.
But not my problem, but it is a tight timeline. All right, thank you.
Councilmember Walsh?
With this 10-year thing, and if, suppose that they don't, whatever, whether it's the school or city or whatever entity does not meet that, and the impact fees need to be refunded, is it refunded to the original developer, to the present property owner, to who's it refunded to? Because there's kind of a, you know, if it's the original developer, I mean, they've kind of passed those costs on to the, whoever bought it. I mean,
Right.
how does that work?
My understanding, and Kent, feel free to jump in, my understanding is it goes back to that entity that paid it. So you're right, you know, if that entity passed along those charges to first buyers or renters, then they're already made whole and then they get a refund 10 years later. Usually, public entities usually don't have trouble paying for improvements with impact fees.
I guess at some point, we should have a discussion with the school district regarding what our current enrollment is, because I know that there are schools that are losing enrollment because of the COVID implications, but, you know, because the money goes to build schools. And so we've had a lot of schools that have been built. And all of that $20,000 impact fee has been used. But I guess moving forward, I guess I'd want to know is how many more schools are going to need to be built.
So, my follow-up question on that. So right now, downtown core, it's zero impact fees for schools for as long as we can see out based on this amendment, correct?
For studio 1 and 2 bedroom.
Right.
Okay, and then the top zone, again, we get to set the fee, well, we haven't set it to be, when we vote, if we vote on this for 36 or 22, that's just a placeholder as of today, correct?
Yes.
So having a number there tells people, hey, I'm gonna get an impact fee of 3,600, but in reality, it's just a placeholder until we decide.
Yes.
This is the format to have something, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then lastly, allow for 5% inflation. That's again, the format. We could pick what date we want that to be.
Yes.
Okay, so if we move this forward, there's 4 places to plug a number that we are not agreeing to yet.
Apparently.
Well, no, I mean, I don't know, just like on the park impact fee, we had numbers, but we didn't agree to them yet.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this kind of somewhat answers Deputy Mayor Honda's question from before and also dovetails into what Councilmember Dovey just asked. But there's actually another limitation, which is the number that the school district's methodology spits out, right? And so if they spit out 0, the maximum you guys can impose is 0, right? You cannot go over what their number spits out, right? So if it spits out 0 for the next 6 years, you guys have to set it at 0. So that's an additional potential limitation on how high it can get. It's only if it spits out a number higher than 0 that these potential caps or the limitation at 0 that we've written into our own code come into play.
So could they ever come to the special meeting and give us the formula and show it how it spits it out?
I actually believe the formula is attached to the original ordinance that adopted school impact fees. It's actually referenced in code as well, so we can provide that to you, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question on why you chose August 2024. Is there a reason for that?
That's when we get their next capital facilities plan.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, keep going?
Keep going, yeah, you're
All
doing
right,
great.
so here's a bunch of code stuff. I'm not going to go through that. But Councilmember Dovey wanted to talk about the inclusionary requirement.
Yeah, I know.
Which is number 8. And one of the things that Heartland recommended was that specifically, again, for our BC zone and our CCF and CCC zones, is that the inclusionary requirement doesn't provide the developer with anything, given that those zones don't have a maximum density. So usually what happens with an inclusionary requirement is we say, you guys give us a certain number of affordable housing units, and because you're doing that, we give you more density, and there's kind of a quid pro quo, and everybody smiles. With us, we just said, give us some inclusionary units, and we called it a day. I think that was considered problematic by our city attorney. So Heartland said, look, there needs to be a give back of some kind. So what we've got in the draft ordinance right now is, again, we didn't want to get rid of the inclusionary requirement because it's really our only tool to get affordable housing units. And because there's going to be a mandate from the state for us to have at least some tools to get affordable housing in federal way, staff's position is that I think it's prudent to keep it. But what we offered as a bonus is to get rid of the parking requirement for those units. And the amount of money for a structured parking stall can be somewhere along the lines of $60,000 a stall. And so that's a tangible benefit for a developer to have the affordable units.
So that's just for downtown, because somebody building out on Kitt's Corner is not going to put a structured.
Sure.
And this doesn't affect Kitt's Corner.
And a surface stall is, I'm gonna go with $8,000 to $10,000, and EJ's probably telling me I'm probably low. So there's still a significant, I think, benefit for giving them a pass on the required parking.
Can you just recap, what is meant by exclusionary requirement?
Sure. So what the inclusionary requirement says in the code is that if your project is above like 25 units, then you have to provide a certain number of affordable units as part of your project. And those affordable units have to be at 50% AMI. So it's a way to get a mixed income project. So there's a lot of benefits for inclusionary programs, but I think why it got highlighted by Heartland is there was nothing that the developers were getting. This was just a gouge point for them. And so I think what we're trying to do is make it a little bit more balanced in terms of, yes, give us some affordable units with your overall project, and in return, your parking count can go down by a little bit, and that'll save you some project cost.
Yeah. Thank you.
But parking costs are one time or can be amortized over 3 years or 5 years, and this affordable inclusion is for the rest of the life of the property, correct?
I believe so.
That correct?
Correct, it's for the life of the project.
So if somebody, I don't know, if a market rent is $2,000 and we're at 50%, are we telling them they have to rent it for $1,000? Or what's the, refresh me on the formula.
So it's based on, it's not 50% of market, it's based on people who are making 50% of the area median income. And so if the area median income right now is like $85,000 for a family of four, if you were making 43, you would qualify. And those are hard-found housing units, and so I think there is a need for that in our community. And again, having them mixed in with those market units just creates a better fabric for the community.
And then the rental price would be, what, 30% of, or?
It has to be 30% of their adjusted income. So,
Okay.
and part of it is, I hate to say it, and I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but those end up being the units that are harder to lease anyway. So they're the ones that are maybe on the dark side of the building, they're maybe on the ground floor as opposed to the ones with a view. And so, you know, they're usually, there are usually some units within most buildings that are less desirable than others. And it usually ends up being those.
I have a question. On number 5, it says, make consistent the open space requirement and allow for a fee in lieu of option. Should that be
Yes.
removed?
So number 5 is, and the reason why there's nothing being proposed at this time is because Evan is working on a standalone code amendment for open space, which you guys heard about earlier. If you look at our code right now, the open space requirement varies dramatically by zone. So for example, if you're in the city center, the requirement is 100 square feet per unit. If you're in the RM zone, it's 400 square feet per unit. And then when you're in single family, it's 15% of your gross land area. So part of it, and part of where we are, is responding to one of Heartland's recommendations. We knew this needed to happen anyway, was like it should be consistent across the board. If there's a certain open space requirement by project, it should be consistent across all zones. And so Evan's doing the research and bringing you code amendments for that. The fee in lieu of provision, what that allows for is like half of the open space. If you're having a tough time finding it on your property, or if you want to pay to basically put it somewhere else, you can write a check to our Parks Department to do that for up to half of the required open space. And that's going to be allowed for in all the zones. So it's a little bit different than a park. It's actually, well, it might go to the same end as a park impact fee, because it's all money going to the Parks Department to spend for park improvements. But they could use that money for other stuff, like, for example, maintenance or other things that they can't use impact fees for. So it's a little bit of a different revenue source for them, but it would only be allowed, it would only be done if a developer can't find however many square feet per unit it is, if they can't find it on their property, and the city's okay with it going off-site, then it could be, they could write a check.
Lydia, you have a question?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Did you have another one, Deputy Mayor?
No, thank you.
But this is a whole topic that you guys haven't had a presentation on yet. Just
Okay.
want to be clear on that. But you will be getting it soon.
Awesome.
Lydia, your hand's up? Okay.
I think Keith was saying, but wait, there's more.
No, I was not going to say, but wait, there's more. I was going to let you see them so that there'd be less questions.
Lydia, did you have a question, or is your hand up? Okay, well, maybe she'll, okay, Councilmember President.
Well, just one question I have is, I don't have a problem with the inclusionary units per se. I'm just wondering, how does it work? Does it go for a certain period of years? What if the building's sold? How does it?
Yeah, so in theory, so there's a lot of ways to answer this question. In theory, it's supposed to last for the length of the project. So if that project lasts for 50 years, then those affordable units should stay for 50 years. There's a covenant that says that, and right now, we don't do any monitoring of that. So whether that's really happening for 50 years or not, right now, we don't have the resources really to kind of check on that, but it's supposed to be for the life of the project.
And to be specific, it is a legally binding document that the developer signs saying they have to do that for that period of time or the life of the project.
So if the project sells, does the 50-year thing go away?
It does not. It has to. It's also required to be legally binding on all successors and assigns. So the life of the project relates to that actual building existing itself.
It's in the title itself then.
Are there,
Correct. It's on title. Yes.
I mean, you know what the value, the dollar amount's going to be. Couldn't you just say, hey, it's going to cost this month to not have the affordable housing, and we use it for something else that you need for affordable housing for somebody?
So,
I mean,
I think we're willing to talk to, I had a conversation with a certain builder who's building at First and 348th, who I think just realized that that's going to cost him $10,000 a month. And we talked about choices and options, and we'll continue having those conversations as they kind of move through kind of their construction. And so I think the city's trying to be reasonable, but yet also recognize there's a big need for housing at this income level in our community today.
No, I don't disagree there's a need, but just doing the rough math, $120,000 a year times 50 years, that's a lot of money.
Yes, sir.
And I do want to point out that.
Maybe we need to rethink that. That's not, I don't know, that seems like excessive.
And of course, so this code amendment is designed to give that incentive as to parking or not.
But parking's a one-time $65,000 deal.
No question.
That's peanuts.
My point was actually that in other districts other than this, the developer actually gets a density bonus on top of what's allowed. They get basically one market rate bonus for every affordable one they're providing. So I'm not sure whether you think that's a better or worse incentive than that, but there are other ways to incentivize it, is my point.
I'm not arguing that what incentive is good or bad. I never realized until just now what the cost of a developer is for that affordable housing, and I mean, that seems to me pretty excessive. Or I mean, it seems like a big number, 50 years times 120 grand. I mean, that's a walking around money. So.
Okay.
Do I have a motion to move forward? And I'm sure there'll be some more discussions.
Yeah, I move to forward the proposed ordinance for public hearing and first reading on May 16th, 2023.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'm just going to comment that there's probably going to be we need to talk about those numbers and timelines of dates, and you understand that, Keith?
Seems like we have a date on Friday to talk about.
Yeah, we have a date on Friday. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, now we get to hear about Sound Transit in 2035. We might get something.
Friday meeting better be more than an hour.
I promise this will not be an hour. Even with your questions, I'm not sure we could fill this for an hour.
Thank you.
So Kent is out of the office this week, so I'm here. So quick update on the Sound Transit activities for all three projects that they're working on. North of 317th, starting with the Federal Way Link Extension. This is the same update you've seen the last couple of months, and it is ongoing. The new work that they've started in the last couple of weeks is the footings and foundations for the traction power substations. In short, those are the facilities that actually inject power into the light rail line that energizes it, that the trains run on. So they've started building those buildings. There's 3 of them within Federal Way city limits, and then there's obviously more in the cities to the north of us as well. They are also, as new work, working on the new traffic signal that'll be at Military and Star Lake Road. If you've been through there, that signal is kind of hidden up in the bridge that they built. So there's a new signal that gets installed there, and they are working on that. The other work that they're continuing is more or less the track work, which includes wall construction and the track bed and surface itself. Within the downtown area, the traffic shifts that you've seen around town are proposed to remain fairly constant until the middle of July, and then they will shift to allow construction of the other side of the roadways that they're working on. They are continuing to work on the utilities. That's the bulk of the work that's ongoing out there. They also have multiple utility companies out there working in conjunction with them. Within the station area, if you've driven by it in the last couple of days, you can see there's actually some visual elements up on the station itself that are getting installed. That's kind of the next big push that they're working for there. And then the end-of-line facility, which is where the old Red Robin was, is under construction as well. So switching projects to the operations and maintenance facility for Sound Transit, we've met with them a couple of times. They did submit a pre-application meeting to start the process for the street vacation request for 20th Avenue South. As I know, we've talked about this with council many years ago, I feel like at this point. But in summary, that is a legislative action, so that goes through, it's a couple year process to go through that. And ultimately that will come before council several years from now. That's not a fast process. There is some pretty significant public engagement that they need to do before, that's kind of right out of the gate, step one. And as a city, we require them to follow the WSDOT requirements for public engagements for street vacations. So they have to follow the published state policies on how they do that, who they engage with, and the number of outreaches and the way that they do that is following the state protocol. So for the Tacoma Dome link extension, as I'm sure all of the council members heard, there's some delays with that I think was briefed with this body at the last meeting by Kent. The new dates that they've shared with us is they're expecting us to have a draft environmental impact statement by mid-2024. Originally, we were supposed to have that early 2023. So that kind of shows you the delay timeline that they're working with. And they are planning to have a final environmental impact statement around mid-2026. This does kind of, when you work the entire schedule, align with the shift of their projected opening to 2035. It basically just moves the entire project the same amount. In the field, they are doing some preliminary exploratory work, mostly in the form of geotechnical. They're out there in several random spots on the entire alignment, but including in Federal Way. Anywhere that they think there's suspect geotechnical conditions for the foundation track support, they're out there doing borings to actually confirm real world conditions. So that work will continue through the summer. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions. I will stop sharing my screen, hopefully.
Deputy Mayor Honda?
Thank you. So going, excuse me, going to the South Station, there's no updates on any of that yet? It's still being planned for what we were told a couple months ago? So.
I'm not sure I followed your question, I'm sorry.
So we were told a couple months ago that they have 2 new options for stations over there?
Correct.
And they're still looking at those 2 new options?
Yeah, so their board action occurred to add those 2 options to what they, to formally, for Sound Transit's board to formally direct Sound Transit staff to start looking at that. So that process has occurred. So at this point, the Sound Transit board has directed their staff to look at the 3 options, including the 2 that you're referencing, and start that work.
And then are they talking about going down 99 at that point?
That is part of the 2 options that the board has directed staff to start looking at, yes.
When will those decisions be made?
2026.
2026, okay. Awesome. And then, of course, they have to do the public art for down there too.
That will be after that, but yes,
Of course.
that is
Thinking
correct.
in the future,
Yes, you are correct.
since we've had, public art issues with the downtown, so.
Yeah, so that will fall in line with the contractor's procurement of the work. So realistically, I don't see that happening. 2030 would be the earliest that process starts.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, seeing nobody's hands and no other blue lights, we're gonna call it a night and adjourn.